Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kristen Shane, and today I will be sharing my review of 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Now, this is the first book review video I'm doing here on my channel, so go easy on me, but because Stephen King is so popular and because I have heard so much about this book, I did want to share my review, and I hope to do more book reviews like this one on my channel. And let me just start with my star rating of this and whether or not I would recommend it, and then I'll get into explaining why. So I had a really hard time picking a star rating out of 5 for this one for a lot of different reasons, but ultimately I have to give it 3 stars out of 5, and again I will explain why. And I don't read book reviews or watch book reviews until after I have finished the book. And after reading this one, when I looked through some of the reviews trying to kind of figure out how I felt about it, it seemed like people either absolutely loved it, like it's one of their favorite books, or people were in kind of the 3-star range and felt how I feel. So just as like a brief excerpt of this book, the main character, Jake Epping, is a high school teacher who essentially goes back in time to try and prevent the JFK assassination. But in doing that, he has to live a few years in the past leading up to the date of the assassination, which is 11/22/63, which is the title of the book. The main story in the book and what takes up the highest number of pages is Jake's day-to-day life, living back in time, and just the things that he's doing and getting adjusted to living in the 1950s and early 1960s. There's a love story involved. He starts working again as a high school teacher, and most of the book is really just dedicated to his day-to-day life in that time period. I would absolutely recommend this book for you to read if you love Stephen King. This was actually the first Stephen King book I ever read, and I don't know that Stephen King is really just my type of book, and that's okay because everybody can like different things, and that's the beauty of reading. But if you love Stephen King books, I would absolutely recommend this one, and I think that's part of why I didn't love it as much as a lot of people do, because the Stephen King type of book just isn't my favorite type of book. I would also absolutely recommend reading this if you really like time travel, science fiction, or kind of any of those elements in books, because it has all of that, and obviously a huge historical element because this book is about time travel. The main character in this book time travels back in time in order to try and prevent the JFK assassination, basically. So if you really like time travel, especially with some real historical elements, you would definitely really enjoy this. And if you are ready to read an 800+ page book, this is a very large book. It's definitely closer to the size of a small textbook. But if that doesn't scare you, and if you love Stephen King or any of those things I mentioned, I would definitely recommend reading this. I would not as strongly recommend it, or kind of leave it up to you to decide whether or not this is a must read for you if you are turned off just by the length of the book, because for how long this book is, for me, it would not be at the top of the books I would recommend to just about anyone who's wanting to read and just looking for good book recommendations, purely just because of how long it is, and I had a hard time getting through it, and long books don't really intimidate me. I really like long books. It gives you a lot more chance to really get into the story and get to know the characters. But for this book, specifically because of the length, that was part of why my rating of it actually went down, just because of how long it was. And I think for the average reader, again, unless you absolutely love Stephen King or love those particular elements in this book, I do think it would be hard to get through, purely just because it is so long. I would also not as strongly recommend it, or kind of let you do your own research to see if you want to read it, if you are more focused on the historical elements and the actual focus on the JFK assassination and the actual history and events around that. That was something I was looking for, more of the actual history of what happened and the events directly surrounding it. And this book isn't as much about that. Obviously, the main action of this book involves the JFK assassination. That's not a spoiler, it's all included in the book excerpt. But I was more interested in and hoping for more of those true historical elements, or seeing the main character in those true historical elements and some of those bigger things that were going on before and after the assassination. So like I said, I think there are some somewhat polarizing opinions around this book, especially just because so many people just absolutely love Stephen King, and I'm not one of them, but I can definitely understand, and I understand the appeal of this book. But I did feel like it was much longer than it needed to be, or much longer than I would have preferred in reading this story. And I did feel it really got to a very slow pace in the middle, that I was definitely just waiting for it to end and kind of waiting for the action to move along. But I felt like there were some things, like his just very basic day-to-day life, that were described in extreme detail, and then some of the more serious things and higher action elements that I was more interested in, and some of the more historical elements were kind of just glossed over, while some things were described in full paragraphs. So that was part of why I didn't enjoy it, and just because that kind of main middle section of the book was often very hard for me to get through, because I felt like there was not a lot actually going on, and it definitely felt like if you were just there for the main action like I was, you could definitely skim through or even skip a lot of that main story and you weren't really missing anything. Which obviously I understand that's the way King wanted to write this, and that's the way this story was meant to be told. But for me, it just felt too slow, and it decreased my enjoyment of it just because of how much of the book was dedicated to that just very basic day-to-day life. My other gripe with this book, and the main reason that I just didn't absolutely love it, is again that this book is massive. And again, that's not the problem. But the problem for me was that like this much of the book was that main story, and this much was the main climax and the ending. So I felt like if you're going to have an 800-page book, the ending and the main action should take up more than 50-ish pages. Again, this is just my opinion, and I understand this book was written this way for a reason, but when I was trying to get through all of those pages that I felt were slower, to me, by the end, it just felt kind of unsatisfying, that I felt like the end was really rushed and kind of pushed into as few pages as possible when we had just spent 700 pages building up to it. The ending was better than I hoped and better than I expected, and after reading some of the other reviews of people who both loved it and felt more similarly to the way that I feel, many of them also felt like the way the story actually ended was much better than you anticipated, just based on the previous events and the previous story that was being told. A minor thing, but another kind of issue I had with this book and with the main character, Jake Epping, is kind of how he became wishy-washy about whether he wanted to stay in the past or go back to the present. And this isn't really a spoiler because it wasn't a super huge thing or something he really heavily debated, but I felt like at some points he felt so unnatural being back in the 1950s and was having a really hard time trying to blend in. And then other times he was like, oh, I'm never going back to the present, I'm just going to stay here and live here forever. And I was kind of bothered by how unbothered he was by how different some of the main elements of living back in time were, and just all the changes that hadn't happened yet to make modern society what it is. It kind of just bugged me that Jake was not bothered by those things and was kind of just happy living back in time, and didn't really feel personally bothered that he was living before the civil rights movement and all these other really important things that hadn't happened yet. In conclusion, my rating is 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't my favorite, but it definitely was good. And again, I would definitely recommend it if you love Stephen King, if you like books on time travel, and if you're really into science fiction. I hope you enjoyed this review. I had fun making it, and I definitely will be posting more book reviews in the future. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe for new videos every single week. My question of the day today will be, when did you last finish a book? So when was the last time you read a whole book from start to finish? I've been reading a lot more in 2021, so I finished a book last week because I just finished rereading the Harry Potter series. So last week I just finished reading the last book in that series. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are having a great day, and I will see you again next week with a brand new video. See ya.